All right, AP World History, here we go. Unit 7, the one I've been warning you about all year long. It's a heartbreaker. It's a nightmare maker. Oh boy. But we got to get through it in order to get to our last two units. So here we go. All right. I'm going to take you about 30-ish minutes here, and we'll see how much of a start we can get going on it. And then when we get back together next week, we're going to use that time before we go on spring break to jam as much of Unit 7 as we possibly can. Okay. All right. Let's get her rolling here. So first topic that we are going to take on is going to be this whole idea of power after 1900, and we're talking mainly about political power. And we're going to be looking at some big shifts in power after 1900. So we're going to revisit some older friends here, and talk about how the world is going to be changing in some really dramatic ways going into the early 20th century. We're going to start you off with a revolution in Russia, okay? And where we'll kind of take this one is to take back. We're probably even prior to the Industrial Revolution, Russia is already, and this kind of, we go back to way back to the days of Peter the Great, and he was this, wanted to catch up to Europe, the West, very forward-thinking guy, but he's gone. He's been gone for a long time. And the leadership that has taken his place in Russia, Catherine the Great, she did her bit, and she wasn't too bad. But those who have come afterwards, still the same family, this Romanov family that has, this dynastic control in Russia, they have not followed the same, I guess, road as Peter and Catherine, those folks. And as a result, what you've got there with number one, Russia has definitely fallen behind. Industrialization, once the Industrial Revolution really kicks in, you don't really see it kick in the same regard in Russia. I'm not going to say that there's none of it, but they're not going to industrialize to the same extent that a lot of those European countries, like the British, the French, the Germans, they're not going to be able to keep up with that. And a lot of it just has to do with the immense size of Russia. It's going to have to do with the very autocratic kind of rule that has come to be in place in the country. They do not really have a lot in terms of freedom or rights to the people, and so they live in a country where their government is far more focused on trying to control their huge population than it is about thinking about building factories and all that kind of stuff. Okay, matter of fact, that's what we're getting into there in B. The guy whose face popped up there along with B is Tsar Nicholas II. And by the time we're rolling in towards the end of the 19th century, he is the one who is thrust into power after his father is assassinated. Again, it's a really unstable political situation that's beginning to develop in Russia as we head toward the turn of the 20th century. And Tsar Nicholas II there is going to be the guy who really is going to be at the helm of Russia when they pretty much crash it on the rocks. And the end of the Romanov dynasty, and the beginning of a completely new way of doing things. But why? Well, again, lack of industrialization and a very autocratic form of government that they're using there. So you have this powerful leader, and does not take a lot of input from others. It's just kind of almost that idea of almost like an absolutist kind of a king we learned about early in there. Slow to modernize, yeah, they're definitely. I mean, they seem to be a little bit more bound into old traditions and things like that. And Russia is just kind of seen as behind the times in more ways than one, governmentally speaking, politically, economically, socially. They just seem to be behind as we're winding down on the end of the 1800s. All right, and so the consequences that come out of that. Well, my poster probably should have gone over the front of all that. Oh well, so much for the revolution. Oh well, we'll cover it anyway. Consequences. The Russians will start to see kind of cracks forming around the foundation early on. 1854 to 56, the Russians end up in a war against the British and the French and the Ottoman Empire. Those three on one side, Russia on the other. It's a consequence. It's a result of Russia trying to make a move against the Ottoman Empire. Again, always looking for water access. And the Russians get this sense that, the old dying man of Europe, maybe that they can knock off the Ottoman Empire and take over and have access to the Mediterranean. And so they start this war. The French and the British don't want to see Russia gain that kind of power, so they actually jump in to help the Ottoman Empire. And those three together are able to defeat the Russian military, the Russian armies, and win what comes to be known as the Crimean War, being fought over parts of into Russia, Eastern Europe, called Crimea, which is figured in more recent times going on in the Russian-Ukrainian war. The other one that I'll have here for you is the Russo-Japanese War. So we already talked about Japan taking on China in that Sino-Japanese war that happens back there in 1895. Fast forward about 9-10 years later, now the Japanese end up in a war. And it's like a border dispute, kind of boundaries, that kind of thing, what water is ours, what water is yours, all that kind of business. And they get into this little war. It's mainly a naval war, but there's a little bit of land fighting as well. It doesn't turn into anything massive, because just like they had done with the Chinese, little Japan is showing the world that, look at us. They kick the Russians' butt, and the Russians are forced to ask for peace. And matter of fact, Teddy Roosevelt steps in and kind of meets with everyone, and they hammer out a peace treaty. And again, the Russians, they've lost. They're on the wrong end of it. All right. And that is going to lead to, actually, I'm simplifying it here with 1917. Actually, in 1905. There is a first wave, I'd say, revolution that takes place. Tsar Nicholas is able to maintain his power. He has to kind of make some concessions, and he should have realized at that point in time that there was trouble in the air. But being a very, very insulated leader, like a lot of those kind of absolutists and autocratic kind of rulers are, they don't always see the danger that's in front of him. He concedes a few little concessions here and there, but keeps going on his way. By 1917, a major change that has happened. Russia is fully involved in World War I. They do terribly in World War I. They're fighting against Germany and Austria-Hungary, and they are just being pretty much cleaned out in this war. In 1915, about a year or so after the war starts, and after Russia has already lost well over 1 million soldiers, the Tsar steps in to take personal command of the Russian armies, which is a really stupid mistake because he has no military training to speak of. And when the war continues going in a bad way for Russia, now he can't even blame anyone else. He's the one calling the shots, and it just creates even more anger towards him, towards his government, and opens the door to the first major communist revolution. Vladimir Lenin, that you see pictured over there, so many of his paintings and images of him, he's always pointing at something. I don't know, pointing at everyone go that way. I don't know what he's always pointing at something. But yeah, he is going to be the leader of a group called the Bolsheviks. And they are a kind of a political group in Russia who are committed communists. They believe that in a country like Russia is just primed for communism, which is kind of interesting because it flies completely in the face of what Karl Marx wrote about. He was talking about the factory workers are going to rise up, and seize the means of production. Well, they don't really have a lot of factories in Russia, and so they're looking to the farmers. The farmers will rise up and seize the means of farming. I know it's a little bit convoluted, and some historians will actually claim that really these guys didn't really have any true plans of trying to implement communism in Russia. They just wanted to put themselves in power instead of the Tsar and the monarchy that had existed in Russia for so long by that point in time. All right, the revolution that happens in 1970 is kind of like a two-part revolution. The first one brings the Tsar down. He was forced to give up his position. He abdicates basically his crown, his rulership over Russia, and for a while Russia is run by a government, kind of a temporary, provisional, we call the term, government that looks like it might actually want to lean a little bit towards being a little more democratic, and holding free elections and things like that. But then, in later on in 1917, there's a second revolution, and that is when the communists come in. That is when the Bolsheviks throw out that little temporary provisional government and put themselves in power. And they are going to remain in power all the way until about 1991. All right, and and the way that they will operate the government of what will soon be the Soviet Union, that name Russia will go away for about 75, 80 years, and the Soviet Union, we will never see it operate as Karl Marx predicted communism was going to operate. You're never going to get to a point where there's no government and everyone just takes care of themselves and there's no rich and there's no poor and everyone gets what they need. It's never going to work out that way. Okay, if Marx was alive, he would have been probably telling Lenin and the others, "You're doing this all wrong. You're doing it all wrong." But he's not alive to say that, and so they're going to run the show the way they want to run the show, and so they're going to call themselves communists. But their revolution is going to kind of get jammed up at that part where they're kind of being led by a dictatorship, and never really breaks too far out of that. Okay, so a communist revolution, I guess if you want to call it that, and history calls it that, so we'll go with it. All right. Meanwhile, older friend China. Let's catch up what was going on there. Last we left them, spheres of influence, Boxer Rebellion, and a country that's just getting, well, there it is again, getting weaker and weaker and weaker. All right, all these internal issues, external issues, with all these foreign countries, all that sort of thing, right? Now, add on top of that, by the time we're, fast forwarding toward the end of the 19th century and making that turn into the 20th, you're also starting to see more ethnic tensions within the country. China is a huge country. And they have within them, there's the Cantonese people, the Han people. There's all these different, I mean, a lot of non-Chinese just going, well, they're all Chinese. No. It's much more complex than that. They have a lot of different cultural, ethnic groups, and sometimes through history, they've gotten along okay, and other times not so much. And some of those tensions are starting to show by the time we turn into the 20th century. So that is problem number one that is adding on to all the other issues that China has. Okay, another problem. Through everything that's been going on, okay, coming out of that Taiping rebellion that, back in the 1860s, they are a massive population already, agricultural based. Part of their tradition is large families to help with the farming duties. But by the time we're turning into the 20th century, that population is continuing to grow to a point where they're outstripping food supply. Okay, and you're starting to see the appearance of food shortages in some parts of China, and so that is going to be more and more of an issue. And their government, the Qin dynasty, seems to be unwilling or unable to do anything about it. And so you're hearing stories about little breakouts of small pockets of famine here and there, and people going hungry and that sort of thing. Okay, because of the fact that you have that kind of a situation, and a lot of people already work basically as at a peasant level where they make hardly any money. The Chinese government, the dynasty, is already used to an idea where they really can't tax their people too much. It's like you can't get blood from a stone, and so you could lump taxes on these folks. They wouldn't be able to pay them, and then what? You have to figure out how to punish them, and it's just and so they kept the taxes low. I mean, we'll give them that much credit. But on the flip side of that, if you're not bringing in much tax, then a government doesn't have much to spend on everything else from trying to keep up infrastructure, roads and bridges and things like that, being able to afford a military. It comes back to get you on that other side if you aren't charging a lot of tax to your people. But the Chinese dynasty kind of reckoned that, well, how can we given our population, right? Again, if we focus a little bit more on the external issues, which I think we're getting pretty well versed with that. I mean, we know that there's that background of that strong isolationist tradition that goes back centuries. Go back to Zheng He and his all of his trips, and then all of a sudden the Ming Dynasty. No, never mind, bring it home. We've always had that push pull with them, which has prevented them from turning into what they had been in the early days, which was kind of this world, this powerhouse. Now they're not. And part of it is because there's always that push-pull fight with that isolationism. And then, of course, boom, the spheres of influence and everything that we were just talking about here in Unit 6, all that outside influence from Europeans, even from the United States, being we have a role, from other Asian countries like Japan, who also plays a role in all that. And so, we talked about that China is really in a tough spot going into the 20th century. They're weak within, they're weak without. All right, which is going to make it nothing too surprising when in 1911 a revolution takes place. It is led by the guy you see pictured there, Sun Yat-sen. Sun Yat-sen is a Chinese gentleman who spends time in the United States as a student and then traveling a bit around the United States. And he becomes quite a fan of our form of government. And he has this image, this vision of bringing some kind of form of democracy or democratic type government where, again, free. When I use that democratic, when I say small d democratic, I'm not talking about like our Democratic Party. I'm talking about, democratics in terms of democracy, free elections, your representative government, that sort of thing. And he believes that is a system that can be brought to China. And he is able to get enough of that, that massive peasant population on board to accomplish it. In 1911, the last dynasty falls. What is left of the old dynastic leaders of China, they flee up to Manchuria and try to kind of set up almost like a government in exile up there and trying to pretend, hey, we still have a dynasty going. Look. But no, back in the rest of China, they're done with that. Okay, no more of these dynastic leaders, and they start down the road towards an experiment with trying democracy. As we will later on find out, it'll be short-lived, in part because Sun Yat-sen, shortly after accomplishing the revolution, will end up dying of cancer. And he is kind of the visionary, and we'll see where that kind of leads China. With things not turning out the way that it seemed like they were going when the revolution takes place. All right? Let's go back to another one of our old friends, the Ottoman Empire. Where are we at by now? Well, hey, we talked before about the Young Turks. Remember those reformers, okay? And those, made up of when I say younger guys, and all I pretty much mean, the picture you see over there is a picture of some of those Young Turks. And you're looking and going, wait a minute, those look like a bunch of middle-aged men. Well, middle-aged men versus a bunch of old geezers like me or older running the country. We'll go with young. Young, it's remember, to be young, it's kind of it's a state of mind, right? It's not like an age definition. Yeah. And so the Young Turks were these reformers. They were these guys that looked to Europe as inspiration. They wanted to bring reform. And they did. They had their back and forth. At one point, they were kind of more or less chased out of Turkey, or out of the Ottoman Empire, by the more conservative factions within the government. But they never completely go away. They're still kind of somewhere in the background there, and demanding. They want a constitution. They want more of a government where people have more of a say and all that sort of thing. But they also have this concept. Here's where it kind of gets kind of weird, kind of sideways, because they also argue for what they call Turkification, right? Yeah, there's a term for you, Turkification, and it's kind of a cultural. Again, when we talk about Turks, it's almost kind of like more of an ethnic identity. Okay, I mean, easy for us to connect today because what used to be, what's left of the Ottoman Empire nowadays is the modern nation of Turkey, and Turkification was this concept that the Young Turks had, that not only do we want a modernized version of the Ottoman Empire, but we also want it to be very homogenous. Okay, now for those of you that did not have AP Hug last year, what that means is they want the culture of Turkey to look very, very much the same. Like there's just one culture. And so, remember the Ottoman Empire is kind of, a little bit north, south, east, west, and encompasses a lot of different cultures. And so what the Young Turks are saying is, well, we want everyone to kind of, assimilate. Like they need to become like some version of us. They need to be like the Turks, okay? And so it's kind of a weird one that they're trying to straddle there, and one that they're never going to totally accomplish, all right? So you got that kind of jumping around in the background in the Ottoman Empire. And then you also have kind of ongoing love-hate relationship with the French and British. Like I said, Crimean War, they're allies. The French and British come to the rescue, help them to defeat the Russians so they don't end up losing territory. By the time we get to World War One, they're back to being enemies again. Okay, yep, this is how global politics works sometimes, folks. A lot of it has to do with what the Ottoman Empire sees as the British and French deliberately trying to toy with the economics of the Ottoman Empire. They're already struggling, and the French and British are, dumping tariffs on them, basically working, in their minds, working the system to create these really unfair trade imbalances that favor the French and the British and really harm the economy of the Ottoman Empire. And so they begin to develop a little bit more and more of a grudge against the British and French. And when World War I breaks out in the summer of 1914, they are going to make a fateful decision to join along with Germany, an enemy of the French and British, and the Austro-Hungarian Empire, also an enemy of the French and the British. They will create an alliance with those two countries that will ultimately is going to finally is going to bring the end of the Ottoman Empire. They picked the losing side in World War One. Is what bottom line is what it comes down to. And when World War One comes to an end with that side that they've chosen, what comes to be known as the Central Powers in World War One, they pick the losing side, and when they lose the war, that is when we finally see. Finally, we've been talking about forever. The ultimate demise, the final end of the Ottoman Empire. As a losing empire, they are divided up by the victorious Allies, and independence given to a lot of those former parts of the Turkish of the Ottoman Empire. Some of those former areas now becoming colonized by the French and the British, and what's left becomes the modern country of Turkey. Right? They'll end up with a small little chunk they'll say you can keep this. This is yours. And so when we look at the modern boundaries of Turkey, borders of Turkey nowadays, that's pretty much what they're left with. All right, and that will be the end of the Ottoman Empire. All right, now as a new country of Turkey. This is going to be kind of like their George Washington, this guy who comes to be his nickname Ataturk, but Mustafa Kemal. And he is going to be a guy that, it's kind of like, I don't know, he probably has a lot more in common with those young Turks than he would have had with, those old sultans of the Ottoman Empire. And you can kind of tell by looking at the picture of him. He has the traditional, some of the headdress. I mean, the onion hats are way gone. Sorry, folks. It's the 20th century at this point. The onion hats, people just wouldn't have been giving you respect with them on at that point. But no, but he's still wearing a cultural hat of the Turkic people. But then everything else, below the head there looks very, very European. And he definitely is looking to the West. He's looking to the French and the British as an example of how to remake a new Turkey, out of the ruins of the Ottoman Empire. When he talks about secularizing, the Ottoman Empire had been Muslim. He's now saying, you know what, we're going to make kind of a division. The government, we're going to kind of do our own thing, but we're not going to get our hands into religion. So if you want to keep going down the Muslim road, that's fine. You want to try something else? You want to be Christian? Be Christian. We're not going to get in the middle of it. Okay, we're going to create kind of that separation of church and state. And when we talk about secularized government, that's what we're talking about. It's kind of like the extreme opposite of like a theocracy, where you blend government and religion into one thing. And that's going to be a move that he makes that will make some Turks angry, and for others will feel like a breath of fresh air. Right? And so you'll get a little bit of both going from that. Alrighty. Let's see. From there, let's see. Where do I want to go from there? Oh, Mexico. Let's go to Mexico. Let's head over the Western Hemisphere here real quick. Okay. 1910. They have a little revolution that breaks out against their leader at the time, Porfirio Diaz. He is a leader in Mexico that is running the country more or less kind of like a dictator. Okay, pretty much kind of the iron fist sort of thing. And Mexico is a country that a very large peasant population that doesn't seem to have a whole lot of hope, for how they're going to be able to improve their lives, that sort of thing. And so in 1910, this revolution breaks out, led by a guy you see pictured there with the cool looking sash. He's kind of wearing there under his jacket there, Francisco Madero. And I'm again, I'm not a Spanish speaker, so I'm totally destroying all the accents and all that sort of thing, and I do apologize for that. He leads this revolt against against Diaz. It will be successful, but it will come at a high cost. It is a bloody revolution that takes place. They estimate about 2 million Mexicans end up dying in this thing. It's during this revolution that this guy right here, Pancho Villa, will first make a name for himself, fighting alongside, well, I won't say alongside, but in support of Madero and the revolution. He'll come back to play a role with America's kind of entry into World War I. We'll get a little bit of that a little later on here. But it really is. It's a ugly revolution. But when it's all said and done, the old order is thrown out, and a new government is formed under the PRI, which I'm sure if that somehow gets translated into Spanish, I don't know. But Institutional Revolutionary Party is the full name there. That we'll use PRI to kind of like, yeah. And things won't be immediately like rainbows and unicorns. From 1910 to it's going to go pretty much all the way into about 1930 before things really start to settle down for Mexico. And so, I think that kind of, no, I will mention, by the way, that about 4 years ago, okay, the about 3 minutes I just talked about Mexico here, about 4 years ago, I guess it is, this was the DBQ on the AP test, was about the Mexican Revolution in 1910. And that's about as much as I talked about it to my classes back then as well. And I remember after the test was over and we had a chance to get back together, and everyone was just like, Mr. Floyd, oh my God. And it's like, come on, guys, revolution's a revolution. If you end up getting a topic on a revolution that, it's like, I don't remember so much about this one. Just think about, okay, why most revolutions we've learned about this year, why do they happen? I mean, usually it is. It's you got a big population of people who feel like they're being crapped on, and they want a better life. I mean, you don't have to be always an expert on everything. And as I told them back then, it's a DBQ. You had all your documents in front of you. Come on, give me a break. All right. A lot of them passed it anyway. I don't know what they were going on about. Anyhow, that's why that's my waking nightmare as an AP teacher. Right. Even a small little event like that. All right. D1, 2. That's it. Could end up as a DBQ topic. Yeah, that's the kind of stuff that keeps me up late at night. Okay, all right. Let's just see how quick we can get here. Starting with World War I. Right? Yeah, we're just gonna jump right into World War I. Those of you that had me in World Studies last year, all the advantages go to you now. All right, you get to be the ones that are you have the knowledge. You remember the role the sandwich played, in the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in June of 1914. You remember that whole story. AP huggers, now you're the ones going, what? You remind me, maybe I'll tell you that one in class real quick if someone else in class doesn't tell you already, okay? But anyhow, what happens is the Balkans, right, that area that it had been under Ottoman control, when they break independent, independence movements break out, those nationalist movements, and they all declare their independence. That's the good news. The bad news is it creates all kinds of political issues in the Balkans as all these little nationalist movements go on. The main pretty much area where this really comes back to haunt the Balkans and the world is when the guy who was heir to the throne of the Austro-Hungarian Empire is assassinated while he is touring through Bosnia, which is one of those former Ottoman, part of what had been under their control. He's down there on kind of a goodwill tour, saying, "Hey, we own you now." And assassins from next door, Serbia, another one of those former parts of the Ottoman Empire, they are worried that the Austro-Hungarian Empire has their eyes on them, and so to show Austria-Hungary that they're really dedicated to wanting to maintain their independence, they kill the guy, okay, and his wife, just for good measure. And that is going to start off a whole line of just all kinds of stuff going on. Anyhow, I'll back it up here real quick, and this is pretty much where we'll have to wrap it up because I'm looking at the clock. This guy right, you see pictured here, Gavrilo Princip. He is a member of a secret organization called the Black Hand, and they are Serbian nationalists. Austria-Hungary really had no plans of wanting to invade Serbia, but they did want influence over Serbia. Okay, Bosnia was already there, Serbia was right next door, and so maybe they kind of wanted to have control and influence without actually invading. But these nationalists wanted none of that. They valued their independence, and they wanted no interference of any type from Austria-Hungary. Okay, and the Black Hand was the organization that plotted and carried out this assassination toward the end of June of 1914. All right, yeah, there we go, the Black Hand. I tell you, sometimes I just get way too ahead of myself, and so, yeah, they're just trying to push back on Austria-Hungary. They want the influence in Serbia. They don't want the influence in the Balkan region that Serbia and Bosnia are part of. It's just like just stay out of here. And this is their way of sending a message by killing the number 2 guy. All right, the guy that was in line to take over when the old emperor of the Austro-Hungarian Empire kicked the bucket. And that is what is going to start off this chain of events that will end up getting a whole world war started eventually. But that's going to have to be the story that we save for when we get back together next Tuesday. All right, and we will be screaming through World War One while we are together next week. We're going to handle that before we go on break, but we'll call that good for now. All right. I hope you learned something. All right. And have a good weekend. See you on the other side. Bye.